Hey there, property people. Welcome to the Regional Property Show, where we discuss topics designed to educate and inform listeners on how to get the most from their real estate experience in the Ballarat and surrounding areas. My name is Stu Brien, and I'm a licensed real estate agent and the owner of Stone Real Estate Ballarat. We're part of a large network of offices throughout Australia with a dedicated team servicing the Ballarat and surrounding community. If you would like to contact our office to discuss anything related to residential sales or rentals, you can call us on 5341 2200 during business hours, or just Google Stone Real Estate Ballarat. That's Stone, S-T-O-N-E, Real Estate Ballarat. In this episode, I sit down with Russell Dickson, who is the founder of Dickson Hearn Land Surveyors, based here in Ballarat. And Russell has an enormous amount of knowledge when it comes to the process of subdividing. And not only that, he's a practitioner. He's done this himself on several occasions. So what he doesn't know about the process of subdivisions isn't worth knowing. So please sit down and enjoy this conversation with Russell, because he enlightens us, and I learned a lot of new stuff about the process as well. And I'm sure you'll find it really interesting. So welcome to Russell Dickson from Dickson Hearn, and appreciate you coming in today, mate, because one of the things that I've always wanted to drill into a lot further is subdivision, because as a real estate agent, we get asked about it enormously. Like, it's a question that often comes across our table about, can I subdivide this block or not? And there's a lot of grey area in this space. Yeah. So it was great of you to be able to come in and give us a little bit of an overview. And obviously, it's not I'm sure it's not all aspects of it, but just to give people who might be listening to this or watching it on YouTube a chance to get a feel for what it is. Sure. And so, but why don't you give us a little bit back, because you're a Bunningyong local, or formerly a Bunningyong.
My wife and I moved to Bunningyong about 28 years ago from Caulfield, Infill.
Yep.
We had one child then. No, two children then.
Yeah.
So we lived in the old Methodist church, which is up on the right, and we converted that into a residence. Yeah. And the Sunday school next door, we converted that into a residence as well. And I commuted back and forth really to Caulfield for a couple of years, which was pretty horrendous. And then eventually set up, and in that time, set up an office in Ballarat from the old shop on the corner. Yeah, which is with the hairdressers. I was there for a few years. And then we moved into an office in town. And Dickson Hearn, I started Dickson Hearn nearly 40 years ago in Caulfield.
Wasn't called Dickson Hearn back then.
No, it was called, it had a few changes in names depending on directors. So Chapman, Watson, Dickson, and then, and then David Hearn, who David actually worked as my assistant in when I had the Caulfield office for a few years, and then he moved on to administration role at the city of Burundara, I think, and worked there. And then he came back with me, and he ran the Caulfield office. I ran the Ballarat office, and then eventually we've had a few changing partners over that time. And then I actually got out of the business about 10, 15 years ago, but continued to work for them. And then Dave took over as one of the directors, along with another fellow who's Peter Dennis, who's in Caulfield and has an office in Bunya. So I've got 3 offices now still going. So 40 years has been the legacy of Dickson Hearn. So I asked them to change the name because it's time for me to move on, but they didn't. I don't think they wanted to change the letterhead. So simple as that.
So you come in today after actually doing a little bit of work, because you still do some things.
Yeah, I travel from, my wife and I live in Queenscliff now, and we travel back. I travel back to Ballarat probably on average once or twice a week to still do work, because the issue with our industry is that we're very limited in number of licensed surveyors.
Yes.
There's only, I think, a bit over 350 licensed surveyors in the state. The average age is 58 plus. And so therefore Dickson Hearn's advertised for another licensed surveyor for the Ballarat and haven't had one applicant in 2.5 years.
So folks, if you're a surveyor out there and you're thinking about relocating up to the Ballarat office or Ballarat area, look it up.
Well, if you look on Seek, there's no jobs. You just can't find them. Surveyors are rare as hen's teeth. So we find that very difficult. So I'm happy to come up, work 1 or 2 days a week. A lot of old clients go back 25 years or so, and then go home and do a bit of work from home. And it's a good mix for me. But we've lived in quite a few houses in Bunnyong, but I've subdivided, looked at your current listing, Stu, and I reckon there'd be 20 or 30 of those lots that you're selling, who 5 years ago wouldn't have been there. When you look at the market, as we discussed, they were all subdivided by us as time goes on.
So let's talk about that.
Yep.
So Dickson Hearn as an organisation are surveyors.
Yep.
So what does a surveyor do as part of, tell me a little bit about what your business actually does.
Yeah, what we specialise in now, I suppose, is that we have clients would contact us either directly or through a town planner or through a recommendation from a real estate agent. And our clients would ask us some generic questions about being able to subdivide their block, or can they subdivide it, or is it possible, or what the costs and everything else. So we provide them a service in that we give them a fee proposal, have a look at it, and then prepare do the survey work necessary. First of all, to get a planning permit for them in a lot of cases, and then that planning permit will give them an indication of what their requirements are to complete the subdivision, and then they complete those works over a period of time. Meanwhile, their real estate agent's knocking on the door saying, when is it ready, when is it ready? And those blocks are then made available in whatever period of time it takes. So we sort of guide them through the whole process, sometimes through the direction of a planning group, if you like, because a lot of people will go to a planner first. Town planner can still prepare the proposals that go to council on the subdivision, but only to get the planning permit, not to do the subdivision component of it. So there's a lot of people use the planner and others don't. So it's their choice. Yeah.
So we'll step, I suppose, go through the steps, a bit more detail.
Thanks.
Yes. But what are the various types of subdivision? Because this word subdivision is thrown around a lot.
Yep.
So talk us through, I guess, what a subdivision actually is, and how people can kind of wrap their heads around it.
So in the old days, there used to be various descriptions of subdivision. There used to be a strata subdivision, a cluster subdivision, a land subdivision, a building subdivision. All of it now comes under the Subdivision Act. It's all classified as a subdivision in various components. So when you subdivide a block of flats, for example, create titles for the individual flats, that used to be done under the Strata Act. It's now just done under the Subdivision Act. Cluster was an old form of sort of land subdivision where people had shared facilities and whatever else, hardly ever used, still done under the Subdivision Act. Building subdivisions, as you see when people buy a multi-storey building or a unit above a shop, or anything involving, say, a shop or whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to be residential. That subdivision comes under the Subdivision Act. So there are various forms. They all involve a surveyor preparing the documentation to satisfy planning permit, satisfy the council requirements, to satisfy the authorities, and that's fairly significant in terms of the authorities that are the referral authorities for each subdivision. We can go through that later on. And say, for example, a building subdivision as well. And then once that documentation's finished, we prepare the information that is lodged at the titles office for the eventual issuing of the titles for each of those lots that have been created in the subdivision once people have achieved compliance.
So what you're essentially saying is that we could have essentially someone with a backyard that they felt they might be able to subdivide and then sell off. Or it could be, multiple dwellings on the one lot, for example, that are somewhat connected, but trying to go through a subdivision. Or it could be a multi-lot subdivision, actually. Okay. So the steps that one has to go through, I think this is probably the most uncertain element for the majority of people, is like, what do they do to go through a subdivision? And the people who I know who have gone through this exercise themselves, it seems to take an inordinate amount of time and frustrations that they experience along the way.
Yeah.
So step us through, I guess, on a high level, what someone who is thinking about subdividing would need to go through from that initial stages through to a completion, I guess.
Okay. Well, if you just use a two-lot subdivision as a simple example.
Yeah.
So a person has a house on a large block.
Yep.
That has the capacity to be subdivided. So that capacity to be subdivided means that the lot sizes that the surveyor creates have to be on a minimum, above a minimum lot size.
Mm-hmm.
Now in Bunnyong, generically around Bunnyong, it has the minimum lot size is 800 square metres, but there is a township zone that allows down to 300 to 400 square metres, but that's very limited within just a small square within Bunnyong itself.
So there'll be a lot of people who will listen to this outside of the Bunnyong area, like Ballarat.
Yep.
What are the various things that they need to keep in?
Well, in Ballarat and surrounding districts, the zoning that the land is fairly critical. So if you're going to subdivide rural land, for example, some of the rural land minimum lot sizes have to be 40 hectares or 100 acres.
Yep.
Some of them might have a minimum 10-acre lots. Some might have a minimum of 1-acre lots. Ballarat generally has lots that can go down from 300 to 400 as a minimum lot size. Some of them a little bit smaller, but very rarely. And so person wants to create a block size that leaves the existing house on a required amount of area and the block of land on a required amount of area. So you can, if you were living in Sebastopol or surrounding districts, generally you'd like to think that you've got a block that's roughly 600 to 800 square metres. That has the capacity to be subdivided into two lots as a starting point.
Where do they get that information in terms of the determining, how lower size they need to go down to?
Yep.
Where would that information generate?
So in the planning scheme, the Ballarat planning scheme.
And that's actually located on the website?
It is.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Not easy to navigate, to be honest. Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, even as surveyors, we find it hard. It's sometimes difficult to navigate. So you can find that information. When you get a Section 32 or you buy a block of land, it will have some of that information in terms of what zone it is in the Ballarat planning scheme, general residential or whatever. And then that you can then look that up online, and that general residential information will they can then look at the minimum lot sizes.
Okay. Yeah.
If they've got time, they can ring a planner or they can ring a surveyor. Surveyor will look it up fairly quickly, give them advice. Most of the time that's free advice to say, well, if you want to go ahead, you'll need to create a block 400 square metres or 300 square metres.
Yeah.
And then they then follow that process.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So a quick phone call could save them a lot of time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So we've worked out our minimum lot size and we believe we've got the capacity based on the square meterage at least.
Yep.
Is there issues around frontage and things like that?
There is. So, for example, if you're going to create a block of land, it's going to have a rear block with, has a driveway. That driveway has to be a minimum of 3 metres. So council are fairly strict with regards to the access.
Yeah.
Probably one of the biggest killers of subdivision in Ballarat, a lot of areas, is if the blocks have fall to the back. For example, the block slopes to the back. If you haven't got the capacity to be able to drain that block at the back through an easement or a service or whatever, pretty much those subdivisions never get completed.
Is that because of the cost of?
No, it's all to do with the fact that they don't have the capacity to be able to drain that back block for stormwater. It's the simplest requirement in a lot of subdivisions, but it's the biggest killer of subdivisions as well.
And that's from not getting passed through the appropriate authorities?
No. Well, the engineering department of the City of Ballarat, if the block falls to the back, the lowest point of that block has to have the capacity to take stormwater from either a vacant block of land or a residence that's built on that to a legal point of discharge. Yeah. That legal point of discharge is normally to a curb or an outlet pipe onto a roadway. And if the land falls to the back and there's no easement, that goes through other properties, or it's too steep, whatever. They just won't get engineering to sign off on the subdivision, and it just can't go ahead. It just can't be completed. And unfortunately, a lot of people will get a planning permit, and without the consideration of the topography of the block, if the topography is ignored, they might waste, a certain amount of money and not be able to, complete the project. And it's a big kick in the guts for a lot of people that would like to subdivide but can't.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. All right. So we've determined access, we've determined slope, we've determined the size. What's next?
Okay. So there are certain requirements that the car parking, for example, and that depends on the size of for example, the existing house. So if you've got an existing house that's got 2-bedroom, council are normally comfortable with 1 car parking space. If you have 3 bedrooms, they normally like to have 2 car parking spaces. Sometimes that car parking space has to be covered, so a carport or a garage. If it's 2-bedroom, they're comfortable with just having a parking space. That parking space is normally 2.6 by 5 metres, 2.9 by 4.9 is the minimum. Okay. So the capacity for an existing residence or the front block to have car parking, and then the rear block as part of its development, when they build a residence, will have a certain number of car parks depending on the size of their house.
And if you're not actually going through the process of the building straight away and you're wanting to just sort of separate the blocks, do you need to be going through this?
No, you can create the block of land without any car parking, long as it's got a 3-metre access to get to the block.
Right.
But that you would have to facilitate the completion of the works for the front house. So in order for someone to sell off the backyard, they'd have to complete the works to create car parking for the house.
Yes. So that might mean a crossover.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. End walls, crossover, hard standing area. Sometimes it's a concrete requirement. Most of the time it is.
Okay.
And if they're going to go to the agent and say, look, I want you to sell that house, I want you to sell that block of land, how they present that is fairly critical.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty important.
All right. So you've established that you can do this, worked out the car parking on the existing block, for example, if it's an existing home. If it's just a block of land, a separate block of land, it's just then a case of
just a crossover.
Yep.
Okay. No car. So this, I'm only talking about if there was a house existing, but if you're creating 2 vacant blocks of land, it'll require the crossover for both blocks to be completed. Okay.
Does that actually need to be done prior to the subdivision, or is it a part of the works that would ultimately be, once this is done, it'll get signed off?
Yeah. So when the people apply for a planning permit for subdivision, that planning permit process is you provide the information to council. They send that out to the various referral authorities, including their own internal engineering department and whatever else. And then that planning permit has a statutory time of roughly 60 days for each of those authorities to send back in what their conditions or what their requirements are for that subdivision to be completed. And so those requirements would come from engineering, which would be drainage, crossovers. And then you'd have your referral authorities such as Power Corps, the referral authorities, Power Corps, Central Highlands Water, I'm trying to think of a couple more. Various councils have various other authorities that they send them out to. It's sent out to gas, but some of those aren't requirements. They're just for consideration. NBN is one of the referral authorities.
Okay. Those referral authorities are the ones that are going to provide instructions as to what would need to be done in order for the split to take place.
Yes, it's fairly generic. So they will respond to council when the information is referred out to them. They will come back to council and say, our requirement is that power has to be supplied for both blocks, but the developer or the owner then has to then go to Power Corps or through their surveyor or whoever their consultant is in order to find out what they have to do, and they have to engage a contractor and pay fees. Then they'd have to get a contractor, for example, to do water tappings, someone to do the drainage requirement, someone to do the crossing. So each of those authorities put in a general condition, which is in the planning permit, and then it's done what we call through the sphere process, which is an electronic lodgement. Everything's done through that. And then the people would get a copy of the planning permit, and it would have a list of all of those requirements. Their surveyor or their planner would say, okay, you now need to deal with Power Corps architects, you, NBN, engineering, etc. And each of those have requirements. And that's the time. That's what the killer is. So when people decide that they want to continue on the process to complete the process and get titles issued, some of those things can take forever. Engineering can take a long time. Power core can take a certain time. Central home water take a certain time. So you can engage contractor to do it, but then you've got to get a contractor to do water tapping. Then you've got to do a contractor to get the power core done. So all of those things are untold time.
Yeah. Okay.
It's fairly general.
Yeah.
And the whole process, if you're lucky and you got a planning permit and you went as quick as you could through all of those requirements for a standard 2-lot subdivision, your minimum time will be 3 to 4 months. Can take 6 to 12 months.
Right.
Right. And that's a lot of the times it's because it's a frustrating process. Engineering might come back with extra requirements. So,
okay. So preempting what they come up with is difficult to do.
it is.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to give people time frame. You can say, we can hopefully have a planning permit for you in 2 to 3 months. That planning permit then will have certain conditions you need to satisfy. Here's the list of all of those authorities that you need to speak to, including the council. And then once you deal with each of those, and they then have to inspect the works, contact council through the SPEAR process, and advise them that they're satisfied that the works have been done, for example, power core or, central highlands water. Yeah. And then once all of those are ticked off, council will then do the tick off and issue statement of compliance. The subdivision then is lodged at the titles office, and that titles office process is about 10 to 14 days.
So just to divert ever so slightly, one of the things that I've been hearing about in relation to the government trying to speed up this process, what needs to be done? Like, how can we, if we were in a position to influence, bureaucracy to make changes that would make this process more streamlined, what do you think would need? If it was your decision, if you had the capacity to influence this, what would you be doing?
I think you can only speed up the planning process. The rest of this, they can't. I don't ever see government being able to influence the private, the corporations such as Powercore and Central Hall Authorities, those authorities, to make their processes any quicker. They deal with it under statutory time, and they deal with it under the demand of how many things they've got in there to deal with at the same time.
And you're saying that the planning process, there's a statutory 60-day process.
That's a minimum. Okay. You permit. So someone might lodge for a planning permit, and then in that planning permit, then it might come back and say, excuse me, you've got to deal with the BMO, which Bunnington, for example, has. So work by management overlay.
Thank you.
So you need a report done, and that report's prepared by specialists.
Yeah.
And they can take a certain, I don't want to say what their time frame is, but it depends how busy they are. They can take a certain amount of time. It costs a certain amount of money, and that has to be done and put in before the planning permit is referred out. So, and then there's the big one that people try and avoid all the time, this cultural heritage management plan, for example. If it comes underneath, then you need to get the experts in to do the report and do the testing and do it. That process can take 12 months, 2 years.
Goodness. So the bottlenecks appear to be the authorities, essentially.
Yeah, that's not putting it on the authorities. Not holding it up in any regard.
No.
I'd just say that is part of that's part of the process. It's a process that's got various steps and requires every single one of those steps to be ticked off for it to be, a completion of a subdivision with compliance.
So what I'm hearing from you, correct me if I'm wrong in this quick summation, is that the planning process takes X amount of time, and there needs to be information that comes from the various authorities that tells you what needs to be done. Planning permit can be signed off, but then it's the execution of those that can take an even longer period of time.
Correct. That's it. So the advantage is that if someone gets a planning permit, and they've got a planning permit, then they can sell that block of land. You as the agent can then put that into a contract.
Yeah.
And they can sign a contract to buy that unconditionally on the basis that in most cases, there's a 12-month period or whatever the settlement time is. Yeah. And so people can then enter into a contract with someone to buy their selecting the block of land they want to sell or the house they want to sell. In a lot of cases, that allows them to get some finance, allows them to know they've got a bit of certainty that they're going to spend another $10,000 to $20,000 minimum, for example, to complete the works. Then they've got to, once those works are completed and we have compliance, in 2 weeks' time after that, and then another 2 weeks, they would have settlement and they would have their, they had their funds back from the subdivision process.
So that's where a contract of sale is written up for a block of land, and it's subject to title being issued, and then it settles 2 weeks after title's been issued.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, correct.
Yep.
Yep.
Familiar with that process?
Yep.
See, come across that before.
Yep.
But a lot of independent, owners and vendors around the place probably don't sort of think about that process, and they probably go through the process of thinking, okay, I need to get this completely separated and have it in a build ready state, so that the agent can go and sell it. That's not necessarily the case.
No,
they can get to a planning permit stage, and then engage an agent.
Yeah, and I understand people wanting to present it as best they can. So when someone's going to get a contract that's going to come in and dig up the driveway to put in power or water or storm water or water tappings, the block gets damaged in some regard. So the product gets damaged. So, but it just gives people that freedom to know that there is an end. There's an end to that process, and that they're subdividing for a reason. They're subdividing not because they don't want to deal with all the land. They're subdividing to get money. They're subdividing to buy something else. So it's an unfortunate process, and it's not quick, but that's the nature of the industry.
Has it always been this way?
Yes. Yep. In the early days, when 25 years ago, the titles office used to take up to 4.5 months to register a plan. So you would do all of this and lodge your plan in the titles office, and the titles office used to be 16 weeks. And then the titles office got a directive from the government to say, look, we certainly would like this to be a quicker process, because the quicker this process is completed, the quicker we get stamp duty paid, the quicker we get more money into the coffers. And to their credit, the titles office, which is a fabulous organisation in my regard, in my 40 years in the industry, got it down to sometimes, if there's over 10 blocks, it's registered in 2 days to 3 days. If it's standard, it's normally about 10 days to 12 days. So they have done an amazing job to keep the industry flowing, so that when that person lodges the plan, they know that within a month they can get some money.
So the exercise of actually going through subdivisions, not one that is to be taken lightly. If you're going to go down this path, you certainly need to think seriously in relation to it. When is it an easier proposition compared to a more complicated? When do you start to get into this, grey area where you start to question the sensibility of it?
Well, I think every person that does a development at some point says, "Why am I doing this?" Okay. It sounds like this, but I'm from experience. I've done them myself, some successfully, some not successfully. But I think every single person that goes in there would like to think that it's going to be an easy process, but it never is. It's just the nature of dealing with so many factors. Okay. And because you're dealing with a person's biggest asset, you're dealing with their life savings. So there's a lot of stress involved. The contractors, they'll do the best they can, but they're not worried about the fact that, they're going to take an extra 2 or 3 weeks longer. It's just, people still do it. People continue to do it more than once. Some people do it as a job, and they have got a formula, if you like, that they follow. They know the time frames, they know the pitfalls, and yet they do it successfully. So it's just
can be done in a way that is...
we don't want them to paint the fact that subdivision is a big ogre. I mean, subdivision is a means to an end for people to, as I said, create more wealth or rationalise what they live in or help their children or whatever it happens to be. So it's just a process. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's just not easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is there are some, the council's put some emphasis on infill, haven't they?
They have.
And so, because we have a housing crisis, so we need to have more homes. And of course, in order to have those homes, we need places to build them.
Yep.
And they can't always be, an 800,000 square metre block.
No.
quarter acre block.
No, that's right. No.
So we need to have that situation. And of course, there are, I understand there are limitations around planning requirements to make sure that it keeps up the streetscape of the area and so forth. But there are certainly some areas where it's desirable from the council's perspective, and it's not without friction, but it is something that can be done.
I think it's more important that the infill subdivision is something that the government would like to encourage. You certainly have your greenfield subdivisions particularly around Ballarat, with new areas on the north side of town to come. Yeah. Winter Valley and all of that area keep going out to the west, which is successful. But I mean, there's a point where that stretches your services. It creates more traffic issues. So therefore, I would ensure that most councils will like more infill, because they have an existing, all the authorities and all the things are available for people to do it. Means that probably don't need. There are some subdivisions, for example, we're doing in Malvern, where if you are within 200 metres of a train station, there's no car parking requirement. So the developer will provide a bike rack.
Right.
Probably not the bike that you would ride, Stu, but they provide a bike rack, if you like, so that the councils are realising that we can't always satisfy a 3-bedroom unit with 2 car parks in a multi-storey. Otherwise, you're digging massive holes. Yeah. So there are certain criteria, which means that the council being more open-minded to infill subdivision, and it's based on availability of services. And services is more to do with being able to move people. So, as I said, if you've got those greenfield subdivisions on the fringes of big cities and towns, and Ballarat, for example, that does create traffic issues, and at some point they would require some upgrading. Buninyong, I don't think hasn't got that issue, because it has fantastic road access, in all directions, if you like. But I think the government would like more people to live in a city, because then they're not having to extend their services and create more open green fields and parks and whatever else.
Yeah. One of the things that we hear from people a lot is it's not just about the services; it's also about the networks and the connections and the connection back to the community and so forth.
Yes,
and I'm just using Buninyong as an example today. It's challenging for people to be able to get a small block with a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment unit or a house that they can downsize to. And it is hard for them, because there's just not that many opportunities based on the zoning sort of structures that we've got.
No, there's a history that goes back, like the Buninyong, when it was its own shire. I mean, it was pretty adamant that it wanted to maintain a certain lot size, so that it wasn't a new Winter Valley or a new highly populated area. It wanted to maintain that little bit of open space and the size of the blocks, which is what the attraction has been for Buninyong for a long time. And I know that that's attractive to a lot of people, but it's limiting to others. I understand that. So the township zone, which is very small, allows a few units, but once again, it's demand.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So we go through the planning stage. We're back to the stages top.
Yep.
So we've gone through the planning stage, and planning comes back and says, yes, you can go through the subdivision. What's next?
So then they're normally, hopefully they're in communication with the surveyor on a regular basis.
Yes.
And they would be asking the surveyor, what do I need to do? So the surveyor will send them a checklist and say, these are the things you need to do. And they would be, contact Powercore. Here's the contact for Powercore.
Yep.
Powercore will come back and make a request for you to pay, sign a letter of agreement and pay fees. And you pay those fees, and the Powercore will then organise to put the new pits in, for example, as part of the power.
Yep.
Central Highlands Water will come back with a letter of offer. So that letter of offer from Central Highlands Water will be payment of fees and the necessity to engage contractor to provide stormwater or to do the water tappings or whatever, and et cetera. You pay NBN, you pay them a fee, and they come out and provide, at the first stage, normally just a cable, in other words, where the supply will come when their residence is built. They don't put the services in at that stage. And same with some of the other authorities. So you that's a checklist, and each time they're done, normally that it's uploaded in Spear, which the surveyor has control of, and most times he can see if they've dealt with it. And and can ring them and say, look, I've had a call from the council saying you might need to do X, Y, and Z. Council might come back and say, would they like the crossing? So therefore, you've got to go and get a crossing permit, pay your fees, engage a contractor. Normally, they will provide a list of contractors who can do the end walls or the crossings, depending on the nature of, Ballarat, for example, it's got the bluestone curbs, which are fairly sensitive and heritage related. So, and then there'd be the report for the BMOs.
Yeah.
Sometimes the authorities will come back and say, you've got to add to that plan of subdivision an easement across the back for drainage, or you've got to create one for easement away for someone to be able to drive. Like there's never a clear-cut example that this is how it will work every time. So then the people will then be frustrated, unfortunately, because that process just does take time. And then they will satisfy each of those requirements and then speak to the surveyor. He'll check everything's okay. And then it'll get to the point where everything's satisfied. Surveyor will then prepare the legal documentation, which is the field notes and records and plans and reports, and then we'll send it to the client's solicitor, who will then contact the owner and say, you need to pay these fees. Mortgagees consent, for example, if you've got a mortgage, to lodge it at the titles office. Once that's lodged at the titles office, and then in the hands of the solicitor.
Right. Okay. So, and at that stage, once everything's paid up and it goes to the titles office, splits the title, you've essentially got 2 blocks.
Yeah, with new volume folios. If you've got a mortgage, then your mortgage might stay in both, the mortgage might stay in one. They're all things that are controlled through the solicitor or the conveyancer.
And you can sell off the plan type of situations, can't you? You can actually go down.
Once you've got a planning permit,
yeah.
Only because under the Sale of Land Act, there are certain requirements. And if there's a planning permit, the planning permit is part of that documentation, that contract is legal, binding and enforceable.
Yep.
If you don't have a planning permit, it's a very generic person turn. So I didn't know I had to have a driveway to get to the block of land, or I didn't know I had to put in a pit, or, so the planning permit is a document, or a legal document that pertains to that block of land and allows that contract to be enforced. And a lot of people would like that, that confidence that that's the case. Others want to wait till it's finished, because, when things are booming, you don't want to sell a block of land if it's going to increase by another 10% in 6 months or whatever else. It takes you 6 months to do it, I might get more money. Like it's everyone's own circumstances, their own.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask you about the timelines, but you made it quite clear that that's really difficult to pin down.
Well, if you started the subdivision and you could get your planning permit and everything done, realistically within a period of 4 to 6 months, you'd be doing really well. Okay. I'd like to think that has happened in some cases, but mainly because there's probably already services that are available to the land or the block of land which don't require upgrading or any extra or whatever.
Okay.
So I'd hate to tell people that, it's always going to cost that in time, but that's on average. I've been doing it for 40 years. I don't see it ever changing dramatically in that 4 to 6 months. 6 months is pretty much an average.
How long do you think then someone should, in their mind, and obviously patience is a key here, because things will go wrong from time to time.
Yeah.
And as much as we would all like things to happen at a specific speed, they don't, we're relying on other people.
Yep, correct.
It's about making sure that you have a level of patience
and
funding to accommodate that.
Correct.
So someone will probably need to then allow for at least to a maximum sort of time frame to sort of say, listen, if everything was going according to plan, it'll take you probably somewhere between 12 to 18 months or something along those lines to get it done.
Somewhere between 6 and 12 months, I would think, realistically. Yep.
Now, obviously, the disclaimer in here is that, it depends entirely on the circumstances and on the service providers and the authorities.
And the block of land and what's available. Does that block of land require to have vegetation removal? Is there a VPO, vegetation protection overlay, which means then you've got to get in an expert to say what vegetation can be removed, and then council will ask you, you've got to replant X, Y, and Z, or you've got to make a donation. Your BMO, which A lot of times the BMO will give you a bell rating for the block of land that you've created, plus are there setbacks from areas that are a high risk. So that restricts the block, creates restrictions.
And for the sake of those that don't know, a bell rating is bushfire attack level.
Yep.
And that can range from very low to very, very high.
Yeah, I think the average, your bell rating around is sort of in your high 20s. Is your sort of standard.
Yep.
Some of them are 40s. And then those bell ratings we put certain restrictions on what you can build.
Yep.
And the requirements under the building regulations.
Okay. So it increases potentially the cost of building.
Absolutely. Yes.
But one of the questions I often get asked, you might not be able to answer this, is does it increase the cost of insurance?
I do.
No.
But I think if the house is built to the requirements and the house has satisfied the building requirements under that bell rating, that's in the hands of the insurance companies on what risks they deem that to be. And that
risks. Sounds like there could be quite a lot.
Yeah.
So let's, rather than try and list every possible risk that people need to keep in their mind, what would you say are maybe the top 5? What do you think are the key risks? Like, think about when you're assessing a property to purchase for subdivision, what are you looking for in terms of the risks?
Okay, so you look at your zoning. Okay, yep. What's allowable?
Yep.
Is your number one.
Yep.
The topography.
Right.
And that would include vegetation. So the overlays that are on that block of land, is that going to restrict it?
Yep.
For example. The block itself in terms of its soil type and what else would I be really concerned about? The availability of the services that are near that block.
Yep.
For example, is the water main, stop halfway up the street? Do I have to extend the water main? A lot of, particularly in Bunningong, will there be a requirement from council to upgrade the road, for example? Luckily, council of Bunningong, they want to try and maintain those gravel roads to give that sort of country feel, if you like. But in other areas, you've got to upgrade that road, and that can be astronomical in terms of the cost to upgrade a road.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's mainly to satisfy, for example, CFA will want to be able to get access to, that's one of the service authorities I've forgotten, referrals. The CFA will want to know, do we need to put a new hydrant in? Because we need a distance of 200 metres from the hydrant, 120 metres, whatever happens to be, to a new residence so that we can, put out a fire. So, we've just done one in Canadian where we had to extend the stormwater and the it's just 3-lot subdivision, fairly standard. Extend the stormwater to an adjoining subdivision, $180,000.
Goodness.
Water main had to be extended. The hydrants had to be put in. So it went from subdivision was going to cost $40,000 to $50,000. The subdivision cost $240,000 to $250,000. But the block sizes on that reflect that, they're big blocks that will hopefully sell for reasonable prices. But it's just an example that when you're looking at something, all of those issues are really important.
And that information partway through can be heartbreaking.
Okay. And that's
depending on what you've paid for.
Yeah, correct. That's true. Yeah.
So it all has to be taken into consideration with the dollars at the end of the day. Depending on what
it's not a cheap exercise for the Joe citizen that wants to just subdivide their block of land. It's not necessarily that they've got $40,000 to $50,000 available in order for the process to be completed.
Yes,
and we find that very, very often that the people will just get a planning permit and sell then the development or the whole thing with a planning permit, and someone with a bit more money will buy it. The planning permit has increased the value of the site. We find that in most cases, if it's a planning permit, it would add 20% minimum to the value of the property because people know what they have to do a subdivision. They've got approval for it and know that in 3 to 4 months' time, if they're quick, they could then complete the subdivision at their cost and rationalise it. So, I find a lot of people will just get a planning permit because the planning permit might only cost them average $5,000. Council fees, planner, survey fees, just a basic. That's a very generic figure, but that way, that $4,000 or $5,000, if you like, might add 20%.
Yeah.
Government.
Okay. Yep.
That's worthwhile.
And in terms of, you've sort of highlighted budgets in various different stages, and I guess it depends on the volume. Like if you were doing a 1:2 or a 1:3 or something along those lines as well. So, and I've heard this figure bandied around that, you need to budget for about $50,000 per lot for a subdivision.
That used to be in the old days when we were doing multi-lot subdivisions. Yeah. So in the old days, if you were doing 20 or 30 lots, the average lot size, the average cost per lot was about $50,000. Okay. Now that's probably $150,000. But the block sizes in Bunningon, when I first moved here in the 90s, you could buy a fabulous block of land in Bunningon for $30,000. Huge. Service, those were the days. But, but then to subdivide, it was still going to cost you $50,000 on average per block. Okay. But now, the blocks in Bunningon were worth X, but it might cost, and I'm really talking about that generic $50,000 was more for multi-lot subdivisions. Was never really used for blocks, say 5 lots and under. Sort of 10 lots, 20 lots, 30 lots. That's sort of a general, that's what we call it, sort of a multi-lot subdivision, rather than a little 3 or 4 lot. You can't use that as an average.
Talk to me about owners' corporations and when they need to be a consideration.
So owners' corporations in most cases are used because there is common property, for example, or an owner's corp, there's common property. So in a lot of cases, people don't want to create 2 driveways. They want to share the driveway behind one block to another. So they have to create common property. That common property is then covered by an owner's corporation, for which the 2 owners, if you like, are responsible based on a ratio, normally 50-50, if you like, on the insurance, maintenance, and whatever else, and the requirements to maintain that common property. Sometimes you can, if you're lucky, you can get a service authority that will allow you to run a service. It's not power core, but say, for example, Central Highlands Water, if you do a water supply or something else, you can have an owner's corporation, if you like, with no common property. Just that they know that it's an owner's corporation that is responsible for water supply or whatever it happens to be, that they believe there's more powers under the Owners Corporation Act than there is under the Subdivision Act. Right. Which is interesting. Yeah, so they will allow people to provide services through one of the lots, which normally you can't. You don't want to create common property because common property scares people. Mm-hmm. It's great for insurance companies and whatever else, but it scares Joe average client. And if you can then just have a supply where there is an owner's corp that is responsible for that, and then they then could say, okay, well, both you owners, you have to do something about it. There's an issue with it, for example, where one could say it's nothing to do with me. It's not my water supply. So it's not used very often with regards to that. So that's just a new thing, if you like. We sort of find that, but it's more common in development and use permits where people are going to build houses or units or flats, and they're generally creating a common property driveway, if you like. It's this one driveway which is 3 to 4 meters wide that provides access to each of the garages for each of the units. It's constructed in concrete and has proper drainage and all the requirements within it. And then the owner's corp is created in the Subdivision Act, in the subdivision, as an extra feed at the end of the subdivision plan with the owner's corp details, the special rules, if there are special rules or standard rules. That is a minefield, unfortunately, for a surveyors, the owner's corp. And then the ratio of ownership, if you like, and costs, for insurance and, for if any works need to get done. Yeah. It's very common in Ballarat, not very common in Bunningon, unless people have done unit developments, if you like, that share the driver. But, I can't remember doing an owner's corp plan in Bunningon for the last 25 years, to be honest.
So if there was a subdivision there, for example, let's talk about a simple block, which was a couple of thousand square meters, and the capacity was to divide it into 2. if they were on a corner allotment, you wouldn't need something like an owner's corporation, mainly because they've got their own access, essentially.
Yeah. You try to avoid them most of the time, but a lot of people find that as a developer, you only want to do one road, you only want to do one crossover, you only want to do one driveway. And if the people but then you're limiting the market to someone sharing a driveway with someone that, both in and out. The driveways aren't normally 6 metres wide, so you've got passing lanes. They're normally limited. And so, some people don't care, some people do. But it is a limitation on that, a restriction, if you like, on that parcel of land for each of the owners. And so that sometimes it scares people. Yeah.
So if someone wants to go through this exercise, and let's say someone's listened to this today and they've thought, I reckon I might have a block that could potentially be subdivided, what should they do?
Really, they can make a choice. They can contact a planning. There's some great planners in Ballarat.
Yep.
And you can contact some planners, and the planners will have a look at it.
The town planners.
Yes. Sorry. So the town planners would have a look at it. A lot of times they might send off the referral to the surveyor to provide a base plan, levels, contours, features, where the houses are, what the setbacks are, and all that, to see if there's any restrictions. The planner can then drive the planning permit, and then from then it's then referred to the surveyor. Or you can go to the surveyor. I'm not trying to take all the work from the planners, but you can go to the surveyor, and the surveyor will do the same thing.
Yep.
The surveyor will then, a lot of times they'll have a look at it and say, look, no, it's impossible. If you measure off the side of the house, it's only 2.6. Council don't normally like the driveway to go past the house less than 3 metres. So you can pretty much, a lot of times you'll find the surveyor will give you a fairly quick assessment to say, look, I'm sorry, I think you're wasting your time. Or if you want, we're professionals, we'd like it to work for our client. So we wouldn't want to turn around and say, well, we'll have a go and see how we go. The fee's going to be X. It's done in stages. Oh, sorry, we didn't realise it was only 2. Yeah. So it's more to get a feel from the surveyor. Normally they go out and do a quick site inspection or meet the owner on site, have a look at it, find out what the owner wants, what their ideas are. Do they want to give the existing house, for example, a big backyard, or do they want a small backyard, or do they want the car parking X, Y, and Z? And then you can come back to them and give them a bit of assessment. Now, I've done many times when I've walked out and looked at the block of land and said it's false back, knowing there's no drainage, knowing it's far too expensive to do, a pump system where you pump lift station. If you don't do that, that's too expensive. They're $50,000 a pop.
Wow.
And you've got maintenance for pumps and all that sort of stuff. So there's owner's corps and everything else to maintain everything. So you can turn around and say, look, I think you can have difficulties, and you can save them a lot of time, a lot of angst to do that. So, but I'm not trying to say that the surveyor, a lot of people will do their own homework or do their own submission. We get an awful lot of clients that have done their own town planning, done their own sketch plan, done their own levels. To their credit, they've been able to satisfy the requirements to get a planning permit, but then it stops. You need a surveyor. The Subdivision Act requires a licensed surveyor to do the works, to prepare the plans, prepare the subdivision plans, and get them approved by council, and get them certified with state compliance.
Yep. So they essentially what they could do is save themselves an enormous amount of time by just making a phone call to start.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, that's it. Most of our work over the last, particularly in Ballarat, the last 25 to 26 years, is really just someone knowing, I know a surveyor, I'll ring them up. And there's 5 or 6 firms in Ballarat, which are all good surveyors, if you like, and they could ring any of those surveying firms and get an answer back from that firm on how long they'll take before they can do it. That's sometimes a bit of a sticking point for some people. Or can they have a look at it and fee proposal? Like everyone, that's competitive industry.
Yes.
We could say that we all stuck to a statute of, these are the fees that everyone charges, but they don't, because it's driven by demand.
Of course. Yeah.
But hopefully the people will look after their client and not charge them. We normally don't charge to do a bit of an investigation. We go and have a quick look, give them a bit of idea that it's worth doing it. You can get us to drive it, or here's a couple of planners if you want to do it. A lot of the people that come in that go to do developments or subdivisions want to do a development use permit. So in other words, it's development of use of construction of a residence or additional residence or 3 residences and subdivision. There's certain components. Some people might unfortunately make the mistake where they get a planning permit for development and use, which means they're getting a permit that allows them to build 2 houses, but they've missed the planning permit requirement for subdivision and have to apply for another planning permit for subdivision. So it's really important to make sure the planning permit outlines everything that you want to do.
Interestingly, I was having a chat to a friend of mine who built 3 or 4 units on a block of land in Ballarat East some time ago. And I asked him the question in preparation for our catch-up today. I sort of asked him the question. I said, so tell me about this process you went through. Tell me, how difficult was it to subdivide? He said, I didn't subdivide. So what do you mean? He said, no, I just applied to build these 4 units or 3 units or however many it was and got approval.
Yep.
And I was gobsmacked because I wasn't aware that you were in a position to still do that. But clearly I was wrong, because it's not the first one that he's done. So now this was 15 years ago.
Yeah, they probably don't want to subdivide because it's in their super scan, for example, part of their property portfolio.
Yes.
Subdivision just adds costs, then they're rated separately.
Yes.
They pay.
I think they're rated separately anyway in this particular instance.
But you've got land tax issues, you've got all of those issues. That's all.
Yeah.
But then that's a lot of people that come to do a subdivision have spoken to their accountant, and their accountant says, "I think you could do this. I think you should subdivide that." And that's pretty important for a lot of people to get the right financial advice before they make a step to change their financial situation with their development or their house. It's really important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Russell, really appreciate you coming in today, mate. That's been come all the way from Queenscliff, so really appreciate it.
And I've done 4 or 5 jobs in Ballarat today.
I was going to say, it's nice of you to land the chopper out the front too. Have you tried the Carboni's coffees yet? Because they're not open today, but they opened last week and they've been fantastic.
Regular at the one in Eureka Street for a long, long time. Yeah. Normally my wife asks me to take home a load of pasta. Yes. I've missed it today, thinking this one would be open.
Well, we thought it would be open it only opened last week, so we're not really sure what's going on with the timings.
Well, I used to live just on a couple of houses up.
Yep.
The old Federation Weatherboard, which is just a little bit up the road, and we've loved that park, and we've loved this aspect.
The park's beautiful.
They have pub getting changed for the better.
Yes.
And Carboni's.
Yes.
Buttingong will just continue to flourish.
Well,
yeah.
Well, mate, great to see you. Thanks so much again.
No worries.
We'll obviously chat further down.
Okay, no worries. Thanks, Stu.
If you have a friend or family member that you feel might benefit from some of the information that you've just heard, then it would mean the world to us if you could share this episode with them personally. Oh, and one last thing before you go. We have some really interesting topics planned for the upcoming episodes, so if you have any comments, feedback, or real estate topics that you'd like covered, I would love to hear from you. So please reach out to us via email, which is info@regionalproperty.show, or leave us a note in the comments section. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button to be notified when new episodes are released. I'm Stu Brien. Thanks for listening.